Okay, the work I'd like to talk about is some work I've been doing with two schools, and I'd like to particularly talk about one of the schools I've been working with. It's a very large high school. It's on the edge of an industrial town in the northwest of England, and they've been concerned about particularly their gifted and talented students. They think they do a good job, at least the data show that they do a very good job with most of their students, but the gifted and talented students are not achieving above the average students. So they asked me to work with them, and the first thing I did for them was to source some research articles. Gifted and talented isn't actually my area, but I can source articles for them, which I did. Two of them are high quality literature reviews, and the third one is an empirical study. And then they advertised for staff teachers in the school to work with me on putting the research on gifted and talented students into practice through the school. So having advertised, I interviewed the teachers who applied for that, and we appointed, myself and the coordinator from the school, appointed 8 teachers, one from each of the faculties. So last academic year, from the beginning of the year, these teachers came together to meet with me in September to say what had they read about the research, what had it meant for them, and how were they going to put that research into practice in their school. One of the things that the research says is that gifted and talented students don't always work independently that well with each other. They like independent learning, but they don't necessarily learn more when they're independent. In other words, saying to a gifted or talented child, here, there's another chapter, there's a more difficult thing to do, go away and do that, doesn't always help, because obviously if it's pitched at a higher level, they probably can't do it, and if it's pitched at a lower level, they probably don't understand why they should do it. Another thing they were finding, when we talked about this, another thing that came out of the research, but chimed with their own experiences, was this, that when they do additional tasks for gifted and talented children, actually it often isn't the gifted and talented children who do those tasks. It's the conscientious students, the ones who work hard and want to please the teacher. The research was challenging them in some respects. In some respects it wasn't, as I say. In some respects they said, well, we knew that already. Yes, they do get a very quick grasp of concepts and things like that. They do think more deeply about the subject area. We know that. They have a passion for the subject area very often. We know that. But in some respects, it was challenging their practice. Particularly, it was challenging their practice because they began to realise at any rate, when they started to think about their own work in relation to the research they'd read, that the practice they had of having additional tasks for children, for the gifted and talented, A, wasn't reaching the gifted and talented in the first place, and B, wasn't really stretching the people they had. So they started to design interventions for that. Some of them had special clubs in lunchtime or after school, especially for gifted and talented students, and they invited the gifted and talented students to come along. In some cases, they did things within lessons. So, for instance, the English teacher was concentrating particularly on peer assessment of gifted and talented children. In one case, the history teacher set up a blog, which was neither an extracurricular activity nor within the classroom. She would post up a very controversial blog based on historical sources, posted the historical sources, and invited her gifted and talented students to argue against the controversial blog. And they loved doing this. She said to me, this is what they write. They write sometimes reams on the blog in response to what she'd said. And they'd never say that in the classroom. They're the sort of arguments, they started to have intellectual arguments with each other online that they would never have said in the classroom, because they were, the rule in the classroom is that everybody's got to speak, so everybody only gets to speak for a short time. Over the course of the year, I met with these people every month for an hour and a half after school, and we had tea and coffee, and we had biscuits, and we had cake, but most of all we had discussions about what was the research saying, how were they putting that into practice in their own ways, and what were they finding out. And I was pushing them quite hard to come up with evidence of why does this actually work in your practice. When they finished it, they made a publication which sets out, in the first instance, the research that I'd given them, what had come out of that research, and then moving on from that, they each wrote a page or two about their own projects. And this is being used now to develop their thinking about gifted and talented students within the whole school. Each of those teachers belonged to a faculty of teachers, so they shared it with those teachers, but now it's gone beyond that and it's now becoming part of a whole school project. They also found findings which are particular to their own school. These things had not necessarily come out of the research papers themselves, but they were convinced that these were true for their school. For instance, in their school, recognising achievement is sort of problematic. The gifted and talented students don't like big gestures. They don't like being made a fuss of in school assemblies and having to go forward in front of several hundred of their peers to collect some sort of award. They feel they get enough hassle from their mates already in the school, and what they much prefer are small things like praise postcards to go home, telling their parents that they've done something particularly special. They don't necessarily want their peers to know. They said, for instance, that when they've been consulting the most able students in their school about their work and how they're being challenged, often it's quite difficult to get an honest answer from them. They tend to say what the teacher wants, they think the teacher wants to hear, which can be very, very guarded. However, they've got around that problem by saying, we'd like you to put this on a postcard for us, but not to post it in my room, my teacher's room, but post it in one of the other post boxes around in another part of the school, so that it's kept anonymous, so I don't know when I get that back who's written it. They discovered in this particular school that a lot of their most able children, the gifted and talented, needed a lot more encouragement than they thought. Because they're gifted and talented, they know what they don't know, and sometimes they feel very insecure about what they do know. So being very able at a subject in this school doesn't necessarily mean being very confident, and in some cases it means being less confident than the people who are, sort of moderately able. All of those findings didn't come out of the research I gave them, they came out of the particular school, and I think they're probably local, and I think in other schools they may not find the same thing, they might find different findings, but the staff there are convinced that those findings are true of that school at the time, at the moment, and possibly if the school culture were to change, then those findings would change. So what my main interest has been about using research findings to develop practice in a particular school, actually in two schools. The other school is ongoing still. And where I'm going to take this next is try to roll that out, because it has been successful within the school. I'm going to try and roll that out on a bigger scale, and possibly with fewer face-to-face meetings and perhaps more work within schools, so that it becomes a sort of self-generating improvement.